A recording. Actually, I forgot to turn it on earlier, so I was trying to find a smooth way past that sort of idea. uh, what do you say? All right, enough. Uh, did honest, and this is not an honesty check. This is just a simple question. Did any of you read that piece from Campbell and Stanley, or pieces of it? Outside of the fact that it's awfully dense and it's written very small, can you kind of pick up the notion, should pick it up right in that very first paragraph, the notion of the turmoil that was taking place in the early 20th century? Now, when Campbell and Stanley wrote this, Campbell was probably late 60s. I mean, he may have been in early 70s, but it was written in 66. And so he had been through those wars. He had been he was a psychologist originally, but he kind of went in the philosophical notes in the philosophical direction, because he was concerned about how do we get data that we can really understand what's going on, or have some sense that we can know what's going on. And so it became a kind of obsession of his and his followers. He's had a steady stream of research guys that have been outgrowths of Campbell and Stanley, Donald Campbell. And so even coming forward, and you have the latest, one of the latest, well, the Trocum text. Trocum was a doctoral student for Stanley, I believe, that worked with Campbell. And so Trocum is off that branch. He was a doc student directly off of the Campbell and Stanley tree, but also as you work forward down the trees of doc students and doctoral assistants and things like that, the most recent
make an observation?
Yeah.
Okay, so this Campbell, this was written in 1984, is that right?
No, originally in 66 in a journal or a handbook of research and education. Yeah.
Okay, because I noticed when he was talking about the application to social science, some of the things that he critiques are things that we're still doing today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's the guru. He was the guru. He was the person that eventually figured out how to tell social sciences, okay, we can use some of these tools over here. We can use some of these tools that are used in quantitative work, in this whole positivist idea, but we can pull them forward and use similar tools in social sciences, but just realize that because of the difference in the data in the social sciences, we can't be as exact and we can't be as sure as we can be over here when we have very good tools. And remember, the modern scientific method was basically designed for industrial design, industrial engineers, things like that. As they were building things, they needed to figure out, how big to build them, how tough to build them, or where they could put the poles, or all those things they needed to understand. And so it was sort of developed over there, and then it was picked up in Great Britain, particularly in Ireland, because Great Britain was going through at that period of time, a bit of a scuffle with Ireland, and so the whole idea of doing research over there, they had to figure out how to do it better because England was beginning to starve a little bit. Because about half the people, you killed off a third of the people in Ireland with not taking all their food away, and you chased off a third of them by taking them to South Carolina or wherever, like my ancestors, and put them, set them on the shore and sold them to somebody as an indentured servant for 6 years or 7 years. And so it's there's always a scuffle going on there in Ireland, but uh, what was happening in England because of all these shortages of raw materials, they had to figure out ways of brewing better beer, and they had to figure out ways of growing bigger pigs and bigger sheep and bigger oxes, and they had to figure out a way to do those things because they were going to have to be on their own now for a while because their empire was gone pretty much. A little dust up North America did most of that, but the the empire was gone. So it was okay. Let's do the thing that'll will let us do this most quickly, because we're running short on beer, and so we need to figure out how to brew a better beer or grow a bigger cow or a bigger pig, and that's where modern scientific method came from. But very quickly, other areas of inquiry jumped on it. Different areas of the sciences, psychology, as in toward the middle to the late part of the 19th century, or what psychology grew from. And so it was it was an interesting time, and this methodology came along, and it was very precise, very finite. It just depended on two things. One, that you could create random settings or random scenarios, and two, that you could get not too big a number, but a big enough number so that you could depend on probabilities to help you figure out, what's going on here. If you have two different types of feed, and one type of feed grows so many pounds and the other type of feed grows so many pounds on a pig, you can figure out, is which one of these is different from what you would project otherwise. I mean, we need to know how fat pigs normally are in order to figure out which food. So, there was all kinds of science was so complicated for them because they were doing it on not very good measurements and not very good observations. And so the modern scientific method stressed the precision and preciseness of observations, and the precision and the preciseness in the way in which you analyzed that observational data, because all data is observational if there's a human in the pipeline someplace. If there's a human in the mix of collecting the data, it's all observational. Now, if you have a machine collect its own data, like some of the AIs and manufacturing computers and things like that, I guess you don't necessarily have to worry about that, but I don't know. But you need to have somebody that knows what the data looks like, somebody that inputs the data to the best of their abilities. All those things have to be there, and even in that, there's a slight fuzziness all the way along. That we can't be precise because we can't know how humans aren't random. And two, we don't have 25 copies of the same person to deal with. Everybody's unique, and so because of that, social sciences early on began to think, well, we can't use any of this stuff. I mean, we can't use these tools because how do we know? How do we know whether the measurement's very good, or how do we know what they're measuring? I'm interested in things like intelligence and persistence and commitment, and all those things that we don't have a beaker you can put that in. We have to figure out how to measure that, and because there's a human involved in the process, there's what we call measurement error. in social science research that is much, 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 much more important when using quantitative methodology than when using qualitative approaches. Because we know that, if everybody's different to begin with, and then the difference has changed and morphed the next time you see them, how do you know, when they've changed, or who's smarter or who's dumber? How do we know? I mean, because everybody's an individual. And so this idea of randomness, and this idea of being able to have like subjects, not like, but just like subjects, like carbon copies of each other or clones of each other. But we don't have it in social science research generally. And so, Campbell, and he was questioning, where does this come out? Where do I fall out on this? And, you kind of pick up real quickly that this turmoil that this thing, uh, that the modern research methodology popped out of was, very fundamental to how we view the world. And if you, and that world is based upon, empirical fact. What are the facts? Joe Friday, what are the facts, ma'am? Whatever. I mean, some of you are looking like Joe Friday. Joe Friday, is that some guy you used to know in the Army, or I don't know. But anyhow, my TV references go way back, so don't indulge me. But this suddenly we had this boiling pot of ideas, and I'd say by the time Campbell was writing this piece, it was beginning to sort out, beginning to settle out, and over the next, say, 20 years, we emerged into kind of what is our modern empirical process. Part of it is based on what we now call qualitative research, because we're looking for patterns, we're looking for connections, we're looking for themes. We're not looking to be totally precise. We're just looking with some rigor to figure out, what's happening to this group of people or different groups of people. But also this new take on quantitative research that realizes and emphasizes the nature of the era, that ERROR, if you're not used to my Southwestern Virginia mountain accent there, but that era, understanding this notion of era was important, because you couldn't be precise in your measurement because you're not using a highly precise meter stick. You're just kind of looking at somebody over there and saying, are they mad or are they not mad? So there is a difference in how precise you can be in qualitative, but that becomes a benefit instead of a disadvantage, because that means you can look at each subject in greater depth. And so suddenly you can spend a lot of time on half a dozen subjects, as opposed to have to, collect up, 500 subjects or 50 subjects or whatever. But, with that depth and the singular focus on subject in qualitative work, you kind of get a sense that, okay, well, then what does that necessarily tell me? Because I only looked at this group of people here, and how representative are they? And, so they went through that battle. You can't generalize from qualitative data. You can only generalize from quantitative data, because qualitative subjects aren't representative and blah, blah, blah. And the qualitative scientists would come back and say, yeah, but you're only interested in the number. People aren't numbers, and blah, 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 blah. And so there was this like 30-year war that had raged in the science community as to the value of qualitative versus quantitative work. But then the feminist movement came along and pushed qualitative work forward a great deal. because that was, that was their data, that was their currency. People's feelings, people's aspirations, all those things that you can't necessarily, quantify. And so, now we've got on one side, we've kind of gotten to the point where you have people that are not, they don't want to throw you out of the club if you're one way or the other. But if it comes time to work on a project or something, they may not want to work with you all that much. And so, you still had two camps by the time he was writing this. You had the camp that believed the pure positivist notion that, we're just simply measuring a prediction that was made from a theory. And the other side of the road, you've got the qualitative folks, sitting there going, why should I worry about that? Why don't I worry about how people feel about this and how we can implement this, and what are the barriers and the boundaries and the roadblocks? And so the discussion got a little bit better, because now it wasn't because you're too dumb to do numbers versus you really don't like people. And so now we're a whole lot closer than that. And there is a middle ground that kind of overlaps both directions. This middle ground that kind of goes around both. And that's the mixed methods guys, of which I count myself as one, because my doctoral program was focused around one of the first, show you how old I am, but it was one of the first that was focused around trying to develop researchers that kind of knew both methodologies, that could, play in both ballparks. And maybe they might get better at one than the other, but at least they would know both of them. And so that's what we've kind of come to today. The best science is a combination of mixed methods research.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, anytime. Please interrupt me, shut me up.
You made a comment that one of the debates was that you can't generalize from qualitative data, which
That was the debate back then, yeah.
and so now I still hear that, but now when people make observations that are qualitative and they want to apply quantitative methodology, is that their attempt to generalize those qualitative observations onto
Yeah, I think
population?
in some ways it might be, but I think the biggest thing is the communication factor there, that you need to, whatever you do, when you do research, the big part of it is getting up to the skill set to do the research on good stuff. But another big part of it is, okay, how do we put this in a form that gets out into the research community or the journal community? And, that's that idea of we'll talk about that a great deal more at the end of the course, but how do you get stuff out there? How do you get on agendas? How do you get to conferences? How do you get to, write articles, papers or things like that? Because that's another skill set altogether. It's not the same skill set, but I think it is difficult theoretically. It is difficult theoretically to say that you can, using the definition of the word as we developed it in modern, mixed methods, and not mixed methods, but the modern scientific method, the definition of that very word can create a different thought pattern about what you mean by generalize. And so what it meant to generalize in a quantitative sense is not the same as what it's meant to generalize in a qualitative sense. Because you have the two different views of that same setting, same scenario, will lead you in, two different directions. It might be 1,000 different directions. I don't know. But, that's the thing. Yeah, we kind of forget that when we talk about generalization in a qualitative sense, it's not the same definition we're using in a quantitative sense. And I think in certain circumstances, you can generalize from qualitative. There are kind of two things that happen in qualitative. Either, well, maybe three, but two probably. There are probably two things that happen. You either demonstrate what you thought you'd find, or you don't. Now, in qualitative work, you can always go another layer down and say, okay, well, based on this definition, how would you rate yourself on this, this, and this? And so, yeah, there is a way to build some essence of generalization in it. In qualitative work, the definition means everything. In quantitative work, definition doesn't mean as much as long as it's the same for everybody. And so it's just the difference in the different, I don't want to say the different genres of research that you have, the quantitative and the qualitative. Still a little bit at odds. When I came to App 13 years ago, the reason they wanted to hire me into the research program was because they had two quantitative researchers, Dr. Olson and Dr. Maycott, and they had two qualitative researchers, Dr. Jackson and Kelly, which you most didn't meet. And so they had an opening for someone to do research and evaluation, but every single, George called me, Alicia called me, Kelly called me, yeah. 3 of the 4 others called me at home to see, and this was before and after interviews, to see if they could kind of feel me out and see if I was a mixed methods, truly mixed methods or whatever. And some of the questions they asked were stuff you would have to write about on your comp or something like that. And I guess they were just trying to make sure that I knew the theory like they knew the theory and stuff like that. But both of them agreed that, okay, well, he's not the best qualitative researcher we'd like to have. And George was saying he's not the best quantitative person we'd like to have, but he's pretty good. And so, what ended up happening was I was the balance point in between the others to talk about more quantitative work in the doctoral program and more thought about mixed methods work in the undergraduate programs or the graduate programs, because it's you go out in the world, you start doing research or you start working in a high-end setting. A lot depends upon how well you know your data, because you can't be tripped up over data. The arguments would be difficult enough without being tripped up over data, but you can't be tripped up over data. And so that's why you either learn to how to handle quantitative data sort of stuff, or you adopt or select a sidekick that does know what that means. And so that's why you see some people representing institutions with an administrative assistant and some people not. The ones that have an administrative assistant aren't sure of all their facts, and so they brought along somebody else to fill in. The ones that don't bring along the administrative assistant or your GA or whatever, they generally can answer and fly and know every question without worrying about it. But you have to, quantitative has to be a part of that mix too. You can't be thrown off by quantitative because, decisions are never going to be easy, but going forward, as we try to rebuild a society, decisions are going to be tough for a long time. But okay, I'm sorry. Philosophical, off the board. Anyhow, that gets us up. Did that help? That question, you still sort of ask that question around. Ask it of everybody you have in class, and you'll pretty soon be able to sort out who's quantitative, who's qualitative, and who's mixed methods. And so Any other questions or thoughts, stuff?
I would like to hear you expand a little more. You're just on the thought of, oh, we're going to need all this as we begin to rebuild kind of from this time period that we're in. I would love to hear where you think.
You sure we need to go there?
Maybe just a 1 or 2 minute answer.
Yeah, we'll do the summary light thing. That's one thing I've been doing for the last 4 years in particular, but certainly for the last probably 30 years is spend a lot of time thinking about, where we need to go with education first, because I was in education for so long that our educational system is one of the better ones in the world, actually. But it still sucks because we don't really have a match to, I think 2 reasons. One, we don't have a match to kind of the economic engine out there. I mean, we're kind of preparing people in 2 or 3 tracks to go into the 1950s or 60s again, and kind of work in that way. And so, we'll still crank out certain numbers of students that will do all the grunt work, and we'll still crank out certain numbers of students that do all the work around the town or the city or the neighborhood. They're the ones that start all the programs that, go around and see if anybody needs help in the winter and all, those type of neighbors. But, I don't know that we'll get there, but the idea is that schools really are screwed. And then so much of everything that we have done, and it's gotten worse. It has gotten worse in the last 30 years or so that I've been in it, that I've been thinking about this a little bit more. What we've done is we've lowered the barrier, the scale, because we've allowed students to take alternative paths. And at the top, we do everything we do for those folks at the top, those decision makers, those people that pay the most taxes, that you provide the largest donations. That's the driving engine in our society is cash, the buck. And so somehow education has to be the moderator there. Somehow we have to figure out how to do that. I've been asking that question for, as I said, about 30 years now, and still have yet to find very much. I mean, you see some stuff going, and then it kind of peters out, or you see the gate stuff, and then it kind of peters out, and you see this and that and the other. And you see all these specialized charter programs and specialized schools. And, to be blunt, down south, it was always more a religious thing than anything else, that, I'm just going to take my kids out of those schools because I don't like what's happening there, and I can teach them better at home. Or, they don't talk about the Bible enough there. Lots of things. Yeah, I could go on about a lot of that. And I don't mean to insult anybody's, religion or spirituality or anything like that. I'm just saying that, those 2 things have been kind of intertwined a little bit. And, maybe the other day was the ultimate result of that eventually. But what that has done is made all the priorities a priority. That means that you have a lot of people near the bottom that they have no leverage. They have no way of getting any higher. They're there. And as a society, I don't think we can accept that. I think that's just insane. And we've told a lot of people in the middle, okay, you're gonna be the the bulwarks of the community, the people on the volunteer fire department. You're going to be those guys. And when you open a local paper, you're going to be the one that's pictures there getting married to the local girl. And so they're kind of the people that are voluntarily immobile in our society, that want to live where they grew up, or they want to be there, and that's perfectly fine. But what's happening is they don't realize they're getting poorer too. And so somehow all these gaps, these opportunity gaps and things that we all talk about, it's all, it's all tied to the distribution of funds, distributions of monies, or the concentration at one end. We all know which end that is. And so, everything gets driven by the economics of it. So I think we have to, we can explore methodologies that outreach to kids that, have been ill-served, or we can do all that now. But, it seems a shame that we have to come back and fix what, as a system, we actually broke as a system. And so that, I think that class sort of structure, all that stuff in our society and in our schools and how decisions are made, we got to figure out what to do with it. I don't have a clue. And it's a tough one to do research on, because people get real sensitive when you start talking about those topics. And it just becomes a tough moment to have to deal with there. But it is it is one of those compelling issues that has tied everything up in knots, including our educational systems. I mean, look at the Supreme Court. Go back to the beginning. Look at the Supreme Court. See how many Harvards and Yales you have on there. Somebody said about 70% the other day. It's not, they're great schools too. But, it is, but anyhow, maybe it's an old grumpy old guy, kind of expressing his frustrations of what we weren't able to fix that would have been easy. But, once again, money got in the way. But it is, that's, to me, that's always a driving force. And it creates this economic inequity and this cultural divide and all those things. And I'm hoping that eventually we get back to addressing that a little bit in the research, because, it's the moment, it's the time to address that. It's really, this is the perfect opportunity to do it. But I mean, when you're in the sewer, when you're in the gutters, it's, anything up anyway is good. So, and I think that's what we got to think about. How do we improve things? How do we make things better? And, schools need information, need data. They need people they can trust to listen to. They need all those things. And it's just and to me, the biggest question, the biggest bother. Now, however that plays out locally, and however that plays out, in each community, that's entirely up to them. But it does show a central flaw in the way our government was structured, is that education is not mentioned in the Constitution at all, because it wasn't a social, cultural norm of the time. And so you will not find a single solid reference to education in the Constitution. It's just left to the states. So, there's some of that was our founding fathers were damn smart, but, they missed a couple things. And that may have been one that they missed. I don't know. Maybe we should improve it and just slide it in there, or something. Just nobody knows.
Well, I think in some respects too, if you look to the times that they came from and where they came from, only the wealthy could afford tutors.
Yeah, those were the norm.
So if you can't, if you couldn't make sure everybody could have access to that, then you can't put it in a constitution, because then you'd have to follow through and do it.
Then you have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, doing something is always paying for it. That's always the dilemma. is not the doing it, but the paying for it.
I mean, and they already had a large bill from the war, so
Yeah.
I guess that ended up on the chopping block.
Part of that did, surely did. But you know, we sort of have this idea that we'd like to know better. We'd like to learn things. We'd like to figure out how to incorporate things or how to use things that we may already know that we just have never thought about. Because we're all, you know, culturally blind to certain things, and we don't think of things a certain way. And so, you know, and you know, you cut your toast that way, she cuts her toast that way. You know, that's fine. You know, whatever. You know, those are little cultural battles you're willing to fight as long as you don't break out the baseball bats. But you know, it's kind of that's you know. The thought process that we have to go through to get to where we truly move in an equitable direction is just mind blowing. Just I don't know how we get there for here, and maybe that's the biggest frustration outside. We don't have data, and we don't look at these things enough. But you know, how do we get here? You know, there's some reason why we got here, and so we need to figure out. You know, is it educational? Is it you know, some people stealing all the wealth? Is it, you know, what? I don't know, but we have to figure that out. And that's the value of, you know, this sort of empirical thought. You have to figure it out. But we're at a very interesting point now where we have these two very viable modalities, and you know, we can use both of them. We don't have to do one or the other. Depends on the question. We can depend, you know, and the data we can get. We can do, yeah. We don't have to select, we can do both of them. And that way we get different kinds of data, different sources of data. And if we're going to do both of them, we might as well call it a mixed method study and put it in one study. So it is you know, that's kind of where we are now. And it's pretty exciting. It's one reason I don't want to, you know, hang up the black beret up here or whatever the heck it is, four corner thing. But if you know, if you don't want to do that, the primary reason I don't want to do that is because I'm engaged in some research and doing some things that, you know, I'm into right now, and so that's, you know, that's good. Yeah, keeps your tail on your body, but it keeps your mind going, and you know, they can replace body parts. Shoot, I got 2 or 3 of those on this skeleton, but you know, it is a you know, it is that desire I think you have to have just to want to know, you know, what's the blooming answer to this? Yeah. So, and that's kind of where I come from. And now I'd like to shut up because throat's getting dry. But and you know what throat's getting dry means? It means that on days that I teach, I put off. I have transferred from day drinking to night drinking. Just, you know, just to say, you know.
So we know what to send as a good gift if we need to get in your graces. Are we talking bourbon, vodka,
I'm just an old country
organic
boy.
tea?
I'm just an old country boy, but the country I came from was Scotland. So, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Scotch, got it. Just making sure in case we got to get on your good graces.
But I do like some really nice. I do like and buy a little bit and occasionally drink a little bit of really nice California and American wines, and that's my go-to. But if it's been a hard day, it might be a Scotch.
Ashley, I'm doing this to help you out since your family owns a winery. I can't have anything for at least 6 more months, but y'all go forth and conquer.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I have vices, but everybody does, and it hasn't. I haven't lost it all yet, and I'm past 70, so I'm assuming it's not doing great damage. No, you know, more so than the, you know, the uncle that is a little forgetful every now and then. But yeah, I haven't put my keys in the refrigerator. You know, I haven't went out to get in the car and realized I didn't have my pants on, or I had two different shoes on, or none of that's happened yet. So I'm good. And had a car now for 3 or 4 years that doesn't have a single dent in it, and so it's I'm being good, but you have to. So what thoughts or questions about any of that? I mean, I don't. To me, this is what doctoral classes should be. They should be kind of this discussive and back and forth, and also the back and forth in terms of you doing outside stuff and then having discussions about some of that. And so what else did you take from Campbell? I know it got dense and you probably went to sleep, and it probably your eyes started hurting, or I've used all those, but
I would probably. I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead,
Go
Jermaine.
ahead.
yeah.
No, you
No, I
go.
was just gonna say, we've been out of school since it's like the kids now, since December, and Dr. Jackson used to always tell us to read something twice. I forgot that until I read this.
And then you had to read it
wish
again.
I would have remembered to read it twice, because the first time, I mean, it was intriguing, but I was like, man, I need more time to read it again. But some things came out today when you were talking, is I was trying to figure out, because you mentioned a lot of things about how with scientific method, there were ways to kind of measure growth and measure what accuracy looks like. And I wrote a question on my paper: how do we compare education? How do we know when we've finally made it to the mountaintop of good education? What does that look like, sound like, and who determines that, since we're all human beings, right? So that's the pondering question I kind of wrote down. That's what I'm
I don't have a real good answer, because I ask me those same questions every now and then, particularly when I see some of the stuff we do based on research. But I do think some of these. Remember, this is right at the beginning of this kind of growth of this dual method sort of idea, and then connecting them back up. And so my notions are kind of bent that way, because the doctoral program I went through, they were still very closely connected to that debate. And so, I kind of was in that, and then came forward and worked on a lot of it myself. And so I began to, rethink that debate, and, try to figure out how it kind of worked that way. But in the social sciences, you'll discover that we're beginning to call this the era of less testing, less assessment, which, as a social scientist does two things. One, it scares me, because I don't want to be a positivist view and not knowing a whole lot of data, make a decision that could influence, a school or a kid or a client or whatever, for God knows how long. But, the difficulty was always not necessarily in should we measure things both ways. It was in how do we quantify human behavior? And so that was the big question at the beginning of the 20th century. How do we quantify human behavior? Because they wanted to be able to use modern scientific method, which was quantitative. And so we started developing, instruments and different things. Binet of an interesting intersection. Binet, that developed the Binet IQ test, the original one that they used with military and World War I and all that. It was a curious coming together at the very end of the 19th century, when he went to study students at Maria Montessori's city school, which was right in the middle of the city, and had, all these kids from slums and different areas and things like that. And so he went to study what he wanted to understand is intelligence at Maria Montessori's school. And they hired as a research student, a graduate research student, a man by the name of Alfred, guess what? Piaget, not Alfred Piaget, but Jean Piaget. And so you had Jean Piaget, Maria Montessori, and Alfred Binet, the test developer, all in the same place at the same time, all thinking about research ideas from 3 different directions. And, you know, Binet went off and then developed, you know, the first IQ test and the original SATs, you know, all that sort of stuff that he did, which tried to quantify every single element of a human. And, you know, any of you ever take the MMPI? Yeah, you should do that sometimes. A lot of psychology folks use it as a thing. The MMPI was developed under the guidance of Alfred Binet as what was called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And then they gave it to all the inmates and committed people, as in committed into state institutions within the state of Minnesota, and had them answer the questions. And so they were dealing with people in the, you know, the prison system and the mental health system, all like that, as subjects that they had been diagnosed for different disorders. And so then they added a whole bunch of disorders to it. They kind of created some, I think. And then they gave, based on the data from all these inmates and patients, they identified what the predictability was for this instrument to differentiate and predict between, you know, the axe murderer, you know, the kid who's having issues about, you know, sexual identity, you know, any of those things. All you had to do is take the MMPI and it would tell you what you were going to turn out to be, a sociopath, you know, a psychopath even, yeah, axe murderer, something. Or you could be just a worker or a laborer or, you know, things like that. So it was you know, one of those high moments of human intellect when we decided we could quantify human behavior. So after we figured out we couldn't, and we really can't very well in that way, having a scale that measures, you know, all these little things that add up, we decided we could do it observationally. And part of that we did, you know, in a qualitative mode, part of that in a quantitative mode, so we would know what people responded in certain ways based on language or persona, or, you know, whatever they're measuring, whether you're leaning back or leaning forward or crossing your arm, or whatever, that you could predict how someone would turn out in life based upon some observation of those behaviors. Obviously a few holes in that one too, but or at least I think so. But, you know, we are also unique that, you know, we kind of waste our time to try to find perfect ways to quantify things, because literally we can't. We cannot perfectly, precisely quantify anything. That's the one thing you may have heard me say, but we can, with a sense of probability, sometimes as high as 95 or 99%, predict what will happen based on certain behaviors.
I think that's the going, well, I say it this way. When the conversation comes up about learning loss, particularly now, it makes it interesting because it's not it's almost as if people have thought that before COVID, that learning happened every day with every student from every teacher. And we all know that's not true.
Well, let me qualify that. I think every student, every individual learns every moment they're alive, every day of the week for as long as they live. But now, in your specific case, okay.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So it's like, I had a teacher today say that it'd be no more learning loss today than it was prior to COVID. And I was like, that's a very accurate statement for the most part, because for the same reason, human behaviors are human behaviors. Not all teachers that's in the position of being a teacher are all good teachers, good in terms of getting good data. Let's put a definition of that. And so if that's the case, then we do know that learning loss have been happening over the years. If it wasn't happening, we'll have things like achievement gaps. I mean, those things wouldn't be there if we'd never had learning loss happening.
Well, if we hadn't had, though, if that was an American response, okay. If you look at how you're answered the same question, they basically said, okay, well, the person is where they are. What's the most beneficial way I can work with them in the schools and education and all to get them to maximize them? And so that's why at the age of about 13 or 14 in Europe, the school systems split apart. And, kids go to, that are going to college, go to that sort of program. Kids that are going into technical stuff, go to that sort of programs. And you try to find a slot that you can put kids in. And that's a spinoff of the European apprenticeship model, which has been in existence for 1,500 years, probably. That, the printer apprenticed the next apprentice, or the locksmith apprenticed the next locksmith. And so, we learn to do things because we were born in certain circumstances, but also because, who we were. And so that, we have to keep dealing with that. Oh my God. Is it almost 5 o'clock? Geez. Okay. 6 minutes, I'll stop. Well, and I apologize. I mean, you got me going on one of the things that's been kind of driving me batty here recently, trying to, talk about that topic, but also to see if there's anything going in that area, because we're just not doing research on, what doesn't work in schools, except in little bitty pieces. I think it's more systematic than it is little bitty pieces. But where we are. Okay.
Dr. Bolt, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So just thinking about trying to put numbers with growth. So like I had a teacher talking to me today about how the tremendous growth a few of her students had made according to their iReady diagnostics.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just having a conversation about how 2 days a week she has half her class and she's really able to work with them. And then 2 days a week she has the other half, as opposed to trying to manage all of them 5 days a week. So would there be any validity to the research if somebody like compared these students, what their growth was last year to this year, because they're with different teachers now. So you have that, and they're in a different grade, they're different ages. Would there be any way to try to figure that out?
You want my technical, theoretical thought on that? No. But if you want my purely cynical political thought on that, that's probably why they adopted it. Because you respond to the squeaky wheel. That's what you fix. And once you start getting the band Nazis in with the choir Nazis in with the football Nazis in with all the other groups that all think that they're the most important thing in the school. I mean, school administrators have my blessing. and so they try to be, much more rigid about things. They tend to be. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you can measure any of this without understanding the level of support at home, and the level of literacy at home, and the level of how dense the house is. Even, I mean, if you've got 8 people living in 1,000 square feet, it's going to be hard for a student to get a quiet spot to learn in. And some parents are going to be spending more time with their kids. That might be a benefit, always a benefit, but it might not be an educational benefit all the time. And so, I mean, there are all this, what we call confounding variables out there that you're not measuring. So that's the biggest flaw in the positives thing. You can't know the context because there are all these things going on out there. And so you can't really know exactly the context because you don't collect that information. You don't know where the community's at and all that. But if you work at school, you probably do know where the community's at. It doesn't jive with what you do at school. But I think to try to do that first would be disingenuous, because it's just bad research, and all you're trying to do is to get a little limelight for a little while and get somebody to notice something, and hire you as a consultant or pick up on your paper or your idea or whatever. And so you have a lot of showboating that might want to do that. I know I'm going to remind all my grad students that'd be a dumb thing to do, because you would like your dissertation to turn into an article. And that research wouldn't be good enough to turn into an article. It might be a dissertation, but not an article. And so but there will. I mean, somebody will do those studies. They'll do those studies, yeah. And then they'll use it in whatever direction they decide to use it in. I just think it's just a bad idea to try to do that.
I'm sorry, I know you're trying to conclude for tonight, but when you talk about us learning how to publish articles later in the course, will you also talk about how to maybe possibly get our dissertation to become an article?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. We'll talk about it later, but it's mainly a matter of compression, because your dissertations could be 25,000, 20,000, 15,000 words. Most journal articles, even in fairly liberal journals that take a lot of papers, they limit you to 6 to 8 to 10,000. So you got to take a 20,000 word document, get it down to say 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000 or some arbitrary number, and still convey the impact that it has. And so that becomes kind of a process you learn too. You learn, you send it in, you get responses back, and you get critiques back, and you build it off of that critique. Doesn't mean you can't respond to the critiques, do things a little bit better, add more data, more subjects or whatever, and come back next year and they'll grab it, because the critiques are based on generally 3 or 4 people's opinion as to, okay, is this more worthy than these other papers to be in that journal? Yeah. But it's, it's unfortunately, like all those things we'd like to have in life, it comes with a lot of work too. And that's what you want to focus on, is I don't mean don't focus on kids if you're teaching or whatever. I'm certainly focused right here in front of you, and not totally off track, but I will wrap it in just a minute. That we do need to think about what questions we ask, and then did we collect the right data to answer that question? And I think for this one, it's going to be tough. I don't see how you can answer those questions of how this would be a legitimate quantitative thing. Okay. When does my boss's class start after this? At 6:30?
6:30.
6:30? Okay, we're good. We'll get off here in just a moment. I promise I will deal with any and all questions. Next week, we will launch into content. I'll give you a few more resources to play with a little bit. And then, we'll get in the flow. I mean, shoot, if the White House can say, we've only been here 6 days, we haven't done much, just 42 executive orders, things, they want to, we've done 42 executive orders, which I think is good, by the way. But then they say on the other end, okay, well, can you tell me about this? Well, we've only been here 6 days. So what are you, very competent, or have you only been here 6 days? I don't know. But, it's political. It's a political thought process. But we'll get it together and we'll move forward. And I feel real good this semester, and I'm kind of out of a funk I was in for a little while, but something about a pandemic and not seeing my grandkids and stuff like that just kind of creates a funk. And it's a real thing, and I'm the happy one. You should see my wife anyhow. But it is, that's the kind of what we're all going through. So, if I don't mind if I kid about stuff, if I kid about something and it's a very serious thing to you, let me know. And, I'll put that in the off limits boxes. But I kid a lot about stuff, a lot of stuff, simply because just, I think we need to laugh. We need to get through the day smiling as much as we can. And good joke, little sarcastic comment. Who knows what? Okay. Probably look for those resources to be up tomorrow night. I have to be out of town a little bit tomorrow, but tomorrow night or Thursday or Friday morning. I guess tomorrow is Thursday. It is Wednesday. Okay. Week's half done. You're over the hump. Well over the hump. And now we'll just hopefully we can get out of this big hump that we're all in right now. But in the time being, I will pop up this little recording of the conversation just for, if you want to go back to it. And we will pop up a bunch of other stuff. We'll get into the technical stuff that I started with this time with those 2 or 3 pages from Trocum and the stats thing and that sort of stuff. And we'll start there, and then we'll expand out pretty quickly from there. So we can get into some real articles and talk about, the analysis and see how much you know about the stats, and or if you know anything about the stats, and, because statistics is sort of my specialty these days, last 30 years. So we'll kind of figure all that out. Do sort of a self-appraisal on yourself. Think about, how much of this stat stuff how comfortable am I with all this stuff? Now wait until we lay out a few more ground, support timbers under this thing next week. But, just that, what is it that, where do you think you are? What do you know? What do you feel comfortable with? And, I've taught, stats for a long time. We can get us up to speed if we need to, but that's, at some point we are going to be doing some using either SPSS or this wonderful piece of free software that I now use all the time, JASP. It's neat. It tries to figure out, are you going to do exactly what everybody else does with this, and assumes that you are, and then it basically does a little bit of it on its own. Now, for that sort of stuff, it's good, but for more precise stuff, you need the SPSS. Okay, think about that. Just keep that plot back there, and kind of sort through this whole positivist. I didn't name this thing we're in now, but it's the ultimate post-positivist era. And so we're kind of there now where anything passes for truth. But we will, you know, we'll kind of pick up there, rapidly get into it. And I'd say after next week, maybe the week after, if we're doing the week after. Do we do the week? I think we would do the week after. I'll get that calendar, finalize this over the next few days too, and put up the, you know, the whole schmear, the whole calendar, because it'll probably change as we go along, but at least we'll have something to work from on that.
Just so I have an idea, you're going to post some readings and resources. Do you know like approximately how many
No,
for
not
next
many,
week?
just a couple, you know, 2 or 3.
Okay. Okay.
And I don't do big long papers. That's the longest paper I've done in quite a while, that Campbell and Stanley thing. But it is the seminal work in social science research. So that's why I put it up there. But we'll limit them, but they're almost always short anyhow. You know, by short, it may be a, you know, 3 or 4 paragraphs, or a 2-page article, or a 2-page summary, or something like that. You know, that tends to be what I tend toward these days, because I just don't think people read as much as we need to of those things. But so you got to get as much out there as you can without, you know, sending y'all screaming for the door, because we are such a digital, you know, society. But promise, that's it. I'm not going to say another darn word. I'm just going to say, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. You got my email address. You got shoot, you even got my cell phone number. So, you know, I'd rather email than cell phone, but, you know, if you find that you can't decide whether to go the, you know, pepperoni or Italian sausage way, you know, give me a yell and I'll give you the odds on how that will turn out for you. And we'll go from there. Okay. I'll let you know precisely what needs to be read for next week. It'll be what's up there now, plus just a couple of 3 little things. All right, folks, y'all got to get the South thing. Y'all be good and y'all stay safe. Now, I'll see you next
Good
week.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.